Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Scrap from Jolly Swagman Games. Scrap is a 2 to 4 player area control game in which players are trying to get their hands on as much data as possible. Specifically, 50 data. You're trying to get to have the most data on the turn that someone crosses 50 data. You're going to be doing that in that area control game, in which is going to be a degree of action programming as you place your cards down into your programming queue, you place your functions down into your queue, activating your functions, trying to plan out turns in advance as you figure out how to take advantage, how to fight, how to scavenge, how to get everything you need out of the system. Before I dive more fully into it, this is a prototype. I'll have a link to the GameFound page down below. This is over on GameFound, and prototype, all rules, components, all that stuff subject to change. With that said, the general idea, like I said already, this is an action programming area control game with a whole lot of upgrades and different things going on here. But the general turn sequence has 3 phases. You're going to have your run, call, and programming phase over here. Again, prototype, keep that in mind as we go through this over here. But you're going to have your run, call, and programming phase. And in the run phase, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be activating one of your functions. You're going to look into your programming queue. You're going to have the player boards over here. We have our domain board, our data track over here. But you're going to look at your player board. You're going to look at your programming queue. You don't see anything in here yet because it's the first turn of the game. And then players are going to go ahead on the first turn of the game. They're going to choose a function to go ahead and activate. That's going to happen on the first turn, and then depending on some game states, that could happen other times, but primarily exclusively the first turn, you won't have any functions in play. You'll go ahead and activate a function. You'll go ahead and take care of that. We're going to ignore this for now so I can walk through the phases. From there, you're going to go into the call phase, and the call phase, that's going to be how you upgrade on this domain track. Players are going to go ahead and take their token, indicating which track they are moving up. They will not be able to move up the same track 2 turns in a row, although there are ways to take that token back. You're going to move up on the track, getting stronger in the track, and then you're going to activate one of the functions over here, one of the subroutines of this track, or anything lower. So basically 4 almost technology tracks that you can get progressively stronger in, activating subroutines from those tracks every single turn to give you additional things you can do, additional movement, energy, being able to recruit units, things like that in the game. When you're done with the call phase over there, you're going to move into the programming phase, which is how you set yourself up for the future turns, and you're going to do that by placing cards into your queue. You're going to have your own little battle queue here, and you're going to be placing 2 cards into your programming queue. Let's move this battle board for a second so you can see this. You're going to effectively have 2 cards into your programming queue, so that by the time you enter the next call phase over here, the next run phase, so by the time you enter the next run phase, now you're going to be looking at your queue. You're going to be running one of these cards over here. That card's going to leave your queue. This will come along, and then in the programming phase again, you're going to program that step out again. So you're constantly basically prepping yourself for the various turns in the game. There are ways to pay resources in order to manipulate the exact order of your queue, so you have a little bit more opportunities to do things out of order as the game state changes, but effectively you are constantly planning out your actions you're going to be taking, because these functions over here are the primary things that are going to determine the action. The combination of the subroutines from the domain track and the functions from your card are going to be the main things that determine what you do every single turn from a whole variety of possible actions. So while we'll get into what those actions are, how they all operate, the general idea that you have to know first is that ultimately this is a game about trying to plan things out in advance. Because the turn structure is you activate something you planned, you activate your domain, getting stronger and activating a subroutine, and then you program out your cards for the next turn, prepping the next 2 sequences of actions. Although, and this is where it gets a little messy or interesting or strategic at times, all the players can see what everyone else has planned, which means you're constantly trying to react on the board and with your future plans based on what you see coming down the queue of the other players. There's potentially a lot of things happening in this game. You have to make sure to track all of that. That's the core action loop. You're going to go through those 3 phases. That consists of a round. You're going to keep doing that until the round where somebody crosses 50 data. You're going to see who has the most data at the end of the round, and that's the player who will win Scrap. That's the high-level steps of a turn. Past that, there's a lot of other things going on over here, things that we're going to walk you through. First of all, we have the domain track over here. We briefly touched upon that, but the domain track effectively gives you opportunities to get stronger and stronger in this track. Whenever you cross certain bonuses, you'll be able to take those bonuses, whether those represent some of the data files over here, which are effectively hidden points with values between 1, 2, or 3, with obviously 3 being the least frequent. I don't know why I said obviously. For all you know, they're exactly even. But with 1, 2s, and 3s, with 1 being the most common, then 2s, then 3s, players are going to take these cards. They're going to, whenever you take a data file card, whether it's from the subroutine track or anywhere else, you'll be putting putting it off to the side, and then you have the opportunity of knowing a bit more how many points you effectively have, because at any point you can flip over your data cards to show, for example, let's just say if you have like 15 points worth of data cards and you're currently at 35 in the track, if you can flip over your cards and then combine with your current amount of data you have more than 50, you can do so, effectively meaning that players have some idea of how other players are doing, but you never really know when someone's going to go ahead and flip over the cards and reveal that they have actually crossed that finish line, although you now have the opportunity to flip over your cards and see just how far you got on your turn. So you're going to get various bonuses there. Additionally, this is the track where you're going to be upgrading your hand of programming cards, your function cards. Because you're going to start the game with a hand of starting cards over here. These starting cards are going to determine the main things you can do, but all the players have their own separate track of various cards you can add to your hand over here. Different cards you'll be unlocking by going up these various tracks. So as you look into these tracks, as you see what you have coming up over here, moving up those tracks is going to give you the opportunity to figure out exactly what it is you want to upgrade to build out a better programming queue as you go through the game. So that's going to be the domain track over there. The data track over here is simply just tracking your points, simple enough to the point. This over here is going to be the battle track. We'll talk about that when we get to the battle sequences. But then past that, it comes down to what the cards do. And for the most part, I'm going over a high level over here. I'm not going to be going over every single instance of everything over here. But the general idea is these cards, and you won't be able to see the text very well from over here, but these cards are going to determine the things you can do with a variety of symbology, including the reboot card, which effectively pulls everything back. You see, as cards move off the track, they're slowly going to go into a discard pile, and at any point you can play the reboot to pull all your cards back, as well as resetting your data token over here, which gives you a little bit more flexibility to go up the same track twice in a row, although again, there are other ways to pull that token back. Lots of things you can do to manipulate things in this game that we won't be necessarily getting into at every point. But past that, there's going to be things like scavenging over here. Scavenging is a key part of why you care about the area control aspect of the game, because you can go ahead and take a scavenge action, and you can scavenge in areas that you control for these specific areas. Some of these need to be unlocked. These are artifacts you'll unlock across the course of battle, but as you unlock them, let's say we have these over here, you can scavenge in any number of these little areas here, both getting data points, or getting the various data points shown on those scavenge options, as well as any possible other benefits they might show. Moving up the data track, when you scavenge, the core scavenge card is going to be you pay X energy, and you get to scavenge X +2 areas. So for example, you pay 3 and then scavenge 5 areas, which is going to be a big part of how you get chunks of points throughout the course of the game by manipulating the area control of this board, which by the way is currently set up for 2 players. A 3-player board would have 2 more over here, and a 4-player board would have 2 more over here, but just for the sake of the camera space over here, we have it all set up for 2 players there. But you're going to be scavenging in multiple areas. That's going to be a core action you have there. It's worth noting that one of the aspects of the way these cards work is they often have multiple boxes, and when you have those, you have the opportunity to effectively pay to activate the second box, either by discarding another matching card, or by paying one of these over here, which is going to be a core resource used to discard to get a bunch of different perks in the game. Then you have Spark over here, which is going to give you one of those tokens, it's going to give you 4 energy, and then of course the extra effect. We have Raiding, which has the opportunity to be able to move a bunch of troops to an area and begin a battle in that area, which we won't quite talk about just yet. We have Maneuver, which has a whole lot of moving both your units and your ship. When you move units around the board, you have the opportunity to move across different areas, but certain areas block your movement, although your ship will have the opportunity, enemy ships blocking movement, for example, but as you move your ship around the board, that opens up areas that you otherwise couldn't cross over. So you're going to be wanting to you want to be mindful of the general terrain structure, the way it's set up, depending on player count, as well as manipulating your ship so you can have that extra movement and flexibility. But you're going to get movement for both your units as well as for your ship with this maneuver card. Your reboot pulls everything back. Your forge allows you to get gun tokens as well as crafting more units. It's going to be gun tokens and crafting more units. The guns are going to help you add strength in battle, and crafting units is where you're going to have the opportunity to pay to craft more units, bringing them into play. And then lastly, we have the barrage over here, which effectively is a way of just straight up killing some units on the board based on your unit strength without necessarily engaging in battle. Those are going to be your core starter cards, although as you have other cards, you have opportunities to unlock other benefits. But for the most part, it's going to be things like killing other units, moving around the board, moving your ship, getting more weapons, more units onto the board. What's the word for it? Oh my gosh, the crafting, the scavenging to be able to get the ultimate points you need in the game and or starting battles in the game. And battles are important as well, because when you kill enemy, in addition to the area control aspect of it, which is incredibly important, whenever you kill other units, you're also going to get data that way as well. That's basically what's going on in this cycle of the core, well, gameplay loop over here. You're programming your cards, you're trying to figure out which actions you're going to take in the right order, and then ultimately you're going to be engaging in battle. Now, battle is where you're going to have this battle track over here that you're going to be placing units. Whenever you have a battle, you can trigger a battle in any area, and players have the opportunity to spend energy to move into that area from adjacent areas, as long as they have that pathway there. And this is one of those, they have a bunch of rules of technicalities as far as making sure you can't start a battle that you're not involved in, things like that. But for the most part, a battle is going to involve you or a player triggering a battle in an area, players moving into there, and then resolving battle with this battle board, where you're going to go ahead and use your player screen to be able to hide everything going on the board. You're going to hide everything behind your screen, where there's a handy little tips for battle as well. You're going to assign your various units to the various regions of this battle board: probe, brace, fire, and brawl, with potentially extra weapons going in endure, where they will not be counted. And then depending on the various area, you're going to execute probe, brace, fire, and brawl in order, each of those having an impact as far as what they do, whether they give you extra things for future battles in probe, whether you have brace, where you're going to be able to create a larger degree of strength. All the bots you have in brace are a higher strength, but enabling them to resist the battle. Again, all depending on who places the most in an area will get that extra perk. Fire is going to allow you to take out other units on the board, and brawl is the main area where you're going to be dealing damage amongst the other enemy bots. How you distribute your bots in this little battle board over here determine the various extra perks you got. And so it's a little bluffing game behind the scenes, as all the players involved in battle are going to be placing their bots behind the screen, trying to figure out what to do before ultimately resolving battle, and then with whatever's left alive, putting back down into the area, stunning all bots of the loser of the battle, and then depending on if you were the one who initiated the battle, possibly claiming the artifact as well. You see, all the areas over here have an artifact, and those artifacts are going to be very helpful to slot into your own artifact board. You're going to be able to take these tokens over here, slotting them into your artifact board, at which point you'll trigger your primary artifact action, as well as any of the other artifact areas you have already slotted. So you're going to be looking over here for the various bonuses, and you're going to be able to activate them multiple times depending on the order in which you prepped your artifact board. So there's a degree of, and the color matters as well for some of these actions over here, but effectively the more artifacts you can get across the course of battles, you're progressively triggering stronger and stronger bonuses, because it starts off small, growing, and getting progressively more, and on the off chance you're winning more than 5 artifacts, you can even discard and continue replacing them over there. And that's basically the high-level overview of what's going on in Scrap. You are planning your actions, you're engaging in area control, moving around the board, managing your energy, trying to be mindful of all the various things going on, trying to be mindful of which areas you want to grow into, what your unit allocation is like, what the way you're upgrading your bonuses, the various subroutines you're taking for that extra, the extra attacking, the extra generating units, the extra energy or movement around the board, trying to gather as many data files as possible until eventually one player crosses 50 points, and that is basically what's happening, which means it's time to dive into the review, starting off with ease of play. Before I dive into ease of play, reminder, this is a prototype, which is relevant because the rulebook was a little bit messy to go through, lots of referencing, updates and things like that. This is all prototype stuff. I don't hold it against it. I would say for the most part, Scrap was fairly easy to dive into and understand, and I think once we're down to the final rulebook, it'll be much clearer. There were small nitpicks as far as just understanding things because of the nature of changing prototypes, but the actual game is fairly easy to walk into. There's a few edge cases to be mindful of, but the core gameplay loop is fairly easy within the realm of area control games, I would say. So fairly easy to understand, fairly easy to dive into. The game is not overly long, although I have not played it at 4 players, so I should note that. I played it at 2 and 3, I have not played it at 4. I could see it bogging down a bit at 4, especially if you're diving into like a 4-player battle or things like that, but then not overly long, fairly easy to dive into, fairly easy to teach, and fairly easy to get up and running. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. Starting off with what I like, and the first thing is the action programming. To me, Scrap shines the most, or Scrap is a combination of a variety of things, but the element of Scrap that I like the most is going to be that action programming queue. The idea that you are publicly planning your actions turns in advance so that other players have to deal with that. In fact, there's ways to pay these tokens over here to be able to manipulate the queue, to be able to put down cards and rearrange the order, which I actually almost don't like. I kind of like, and something that players will like it. I will say I'm happy it's in the game because I think players will for the most part like it, but for me, I almost like that torturous nature of having to plan 7 several turns out and having the other players being able to see what's coming down the road. I like that tension in Scrap. I like that idea of trying to plan what my turn sequence has to be 2 turns out and thinking through what has to happen, while other players get to witness the execution of the type of actions I'll taking, not necessarily the specific action I will take, but they will be able to see the type of action coming their way, and then they have to try to figure out how to react and plan around that. Now again, the token is helpful because it's helpful to be able to have those tokens, and they are hard to get, but be able to cash them in for that essential moment when you're going to flip things up on your opponent. It is good to have that. There's also that plus side there, but that whole entire action programming aspect in Scrap, as you plan out your action queue, as you think through what you want to do and how you're going to do it, it both makes the turns snappy and fast because you're planning for the future, which means there's a little bit less of a perfect planning what's happening now. You're just doing your best, but then also the way everything executes and the way that planning system works out, I just really enjoyed that action programming system. One thing I haven't touched upon heavily in the teach of the game is there's also asymmetric factions in the game. The factions are asymmetric, all coming into play with their own special unique thing that they do differently, and that degree of variety, while it does take a little bit more as far as the teach goes, it's a bigger area, goes into that whole edge cases and exception aspect in the teach, but the actual gameplay means that every faction has a different thing that they're going to be doing or way that they can be executing on, giving you more replayability as you choose how to dive into the game in different areas to try different play styles and try playing against and as different factions. So I like the asymmetric factions in the game. You want to do everything in this game. You want to play all your cards, you want to play all your cards now, and you want to be able to move your units here, you want to be able to scavenge, you want to be able to build units. You're constantly trying to do everything in this game, and you combine that aspect of everything being good with the torturous nature of the programming queue, and it just gives you tough decisions at every point. Scrap is constantly making you think about what you want to do and what's the most efficient way to do it. This game is full of tough decisions the entire time as you go through this area control puzzle where you're trying to gather as much data as possible while trying to think several turns in advance, while trying to deal with the other players. It just works well as far as giving you a lot of fantastic decisions to go through. And then lastly, I'll also note that these meeples, and I only have the 2-player setup over here, but these chunky little screen printed meeples are very solid, very adorable, very solid, and lots of fun to have them spreading across the board. Which brings me to what I don't like, which I'll start off by saying, and this, again, note that prototype and rules, components, all that stuff, subject to change, but past the meeples really do work for me. The rest of the general aesthetic of Scrap, it doesn't quite work quite as much for me. It's fine, it does the job, but it doesn't pull me in quite as much, both from a graphical design as well as from a general art stance. It works, but it doesn't pull me in a solid way. No, it doesn't pull me in quite enough, I would say. Past that, in a more serious aspect of slight critique complaint, I don't like the battle resolution system in Scrap. There's 2 things that I really don't like mechanically speaking in Scrap. The first is going to be the battle resolution, where you have this placing your meeples down into this board to plan around which areas you want to go through and trying to bluff or outthink the various opponents. This is a system that's very similar to Rising Sun, and I didn't love that system in Rising Sun either, or in general when you're kind of trying to mind think your opponent as far as how you allocate units in different areas. It is very nuanced as to when I like systems like that or not. For example, in Kemet, a totally different game, when you try to think through what areas of your opponent's going to focus on, whether attack, defense, or strength, I really do like it there. And that's just a card play, but it's a card play involving doublethink and whatnot. For some reason, when it comes to the meeple allocation, I don't know exactly what it is, but I didn't love it in Rising Sun, and I don't love it here either. It's fine. It works. It does the job. I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but it's not a battle resolution system that I particularly find that compelling. It does the job. To me, the other elements of Scrap are far more compelling, and the battle resolution is just okay. The other thing that I'll slightly complain about, not nearly as much of an issue, but the nature of the way the domain boards are structured and the way the cards are very sequential does mean that there is a very procedural element to the way you'll level up in the game, which is, again, totally fine. It does the job, it works, but I almost like the crazy chaos of being able to have a larger range of how you can upgrade and grow within the system. Scrap is going to be far more about how you react to the players, about how you deal with the enemies, and also trying different factions. But as far as how you upgrade, because of the very linear nature of how you have to approach upgrading, there's a little bit less chaos, craziness, or experimentation within the system that I would otherwise like to see. I like a little bit more openness in terms of how I upgrade, as opposed to the more linear fashion, which results in a little bit less replayability and a little bit less experimentation. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, the random data files. The fact that you can get a 1, 2, or 3 when you're going ahead and grabbing a data file can mean that across the course of play, you can have one player who got 9 points and another player who got 3. Now, obviously, statistically speaking, that won't happen most of the time, but it will happen some of the time, and that might be something you find find frustrating. In a game where otherwise everything is so tight, having a 6-point swing across 3 card draws could be fairly brutal. It is the kind of thing that, again, it's worth knowing what you're getting yourself into before you dive into that. Additionally, the secret reveal at the end might be off-putting for you. It's the kind of thing you may or may not like. That one doesn't bother me at all. I don't mind the idea that a player, suddenly shows their hand, so to speak. But if you don't like that secretive aspect of you're playing through an entire game, you're having your tough battles, and suddenly someone's like, and by the way, here's my 50 points, I win, well, that's present in this game. And then lastly, I would say the damage versus health system, the way the units have both a health, a strength, and then almost a damage system, it's not the most intuitive within the system that this is. And I say that way because, honestly, it's the same type of system you'll see in many card battling systems, where you're playing a game like, where they're playing a game like Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone, or any game system where you have effectively a health and an attack. It is effectively that system. I find it to be a drop less intuitive in this style of area control game. Again, not a big deal for me. You pick it up pretty quickly, but it is something I had trouble with in terms of teaching that small little aspect of it the first few times diving into this game with other players. So a small note, not a big deal there. As far as final thoughts on Scrap, and again, prototype and all that stuff, there's a lot to like in this system. I like a lot of what Scrap is doing, particularly the action programming. To me, that's very reminiscent of games like El Grande, of games like Rurik, in terms of the system where you're trying to figure out what to plan out, how to plan it out. You're trying to think several turns in advance. I love that system, and it makes everything more tense and more tight because you're not deciding in the moment. You're trying to take so many branching pathways of the future into account as you play the game, and I like the way that Scrap implements that in here, combined with the rest of the game going on, combined with the scavenging, combined with the general area control, the general combat, the general fighting. All of it combines very nicely. The whole domain system and upgrading, all of it combines fairly nicely to give you a system which you're constantly upgrading, constantly growing. You have powers and abilities. You're trying to build out the best deck. You're trying to plan for the future. Overall, I really like the system that's going on here. For me, the only things that really hold it back is the more linear nature of the upgrading, and then the battle resolution system. Again, the art's a small thing, but not really a big deal there. The battle resolution system and the upgrading system are the two things that slightly hold it back for me, and more so the battle resolution. Again, in a game where combat is a big part of it, I just don't care for the way the combat's resolved. It's not a system I've liked when it's implemented in other games, or here either. The rest of the game still works very well, though. The entire package, as far as what Scrap is doing, is a 4 to 5 for me. The entire full deal of what's going on here does result in constantly tense decisions, constantly trying to figure out how to outthink your opponents, to react to what they're doing, to deal with the system, and overall, I really like what's going on in this game, Scrap, from Jolly Swagman Games. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, I mentioned it already, but Rurik. If you like that kind of tense action programming within an area control system, I highly recommend Rurik. I think it gives you that same vibe as far as just trying to constantly plan and outthink and deal with your opponents in the game. And then if you're looking for a system where Scrap is very heavily inspired by, or at least based on just the things that are going on as far as the battle resolution, as far as pulling into combat, Blood Rage is going to give you a very similar vibe as far as a very heavy combat game in a small tense map as you try to figure out how to get what you need out of the system, as you have both the way battles resolve as well as the aspect of the leader effectively pillaging over here. Very similar combat aspects to a degree in terms of a higher level as far as what Blood Rage is doing. If you like Scrap, I think you'll like Blood Rage, and vice versa as well. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.